Behind a locked door, a mask hides more than a face. Welcome to I Am Your Host. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments mean everything to me. Now, Nero Wolfe, Iron Mask. It was a Thursday in late October when the doorbell rang at 3:15, interrupting what had been a perfectly satisfactory afternoon of typing reports nobody would read, while Nero Wolfe communed with his orchids upstairs. The schedule said he would descend at 6 o'clock sharp, which gave me 2 hours and 45 minutes to deal with whoever was standing on our stoop looking like they needed something from us. I walked down the hall and flipped the switch for the stoop
The eagle's nest has been
Through the
compromised.
one-way glass, I saw a man who appeared to have been pressed, starched, and assembled by someone with a ruler and a stopwatch. He was tall, thin, and held himself with the kind of rigid posture that suggested either military training or 20 years of carrying other people's coats. His face had the expression of a man who had spent his life anticipating other people's needs and was now about to have some of his own. I opened the door. He looked at me with gray eyes that seemed to be taking inventory and said in a voice like gravel under a boot that he wished to see Mr. Wolfe. I explained that Mr. Wolfe was engaged until 6 o'clock and suggested he might prefer to return later or make an appointment. He said he would wait. I said he might wait a long time. He said he had nowhere else to be. This could have continued until the orchids wilted, but something about the man suggested that moving him would require either dynamite or a very good reason. He handed me a card, heavy cream stock, engraved with a single name, Pierre D'Amico. No address, no telephone number.
You think you can lie to me and get away
No indication
with
of what Pierre D'Amico did for a living. Just the name. Like it was supposed to mean something. I told him he could wait in the front room and went back to my typing, keeping one eye on the clock and the other on my report about a missing recipe that had turned up in the wrong cookbook. At 6 o'clock, the elevator descended with its usual mechanical complaints. Nero
Honesty
Wolfe
is a
entered the
sharp
office.
blade. It
He
cuts
moved to
through
his
the
desk
fat,
with that
exposes the
surprising
rot
grace he
underneath.
possesses,
People
despite
can't
weighing
handle
a
the
seventh
truth.
of a ton, settled into his chair and rang for beer. Fritz appeared with a tray, as if he had been waiting behind the door, and Wolfe performed his daily ritual of pouring, watching the foam settle, and drinking. Only then did he acknowledge my existence with a glance that said he expected an explanation for the interruption of his routine. I handed him the cord. He looked at it, grunted, and dropped it on his desk blotter like it might be contagious. He asked if the man was still here. I said he was in the front room, standing exactly where I'd left him, like a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. Wolfe made a face that usually means he smells something burning in Fritz's kitchen, but in this case meant he was annoyed at the prospect of work before dinner. He told me to send the man away. I pointed out that D'Amico had the look of someone who would not leave unless physically removed, and while I was capable of the removal, the man had an air that suggested he might enjoy the exercise. Wolfe sighed like a tire-losing ass and told me to bring him in. I fetched D'Amico from the front room. He walked into the office and stood before Wolfe's desk like a soldier reporting for duty. Wolfe waved him to the red leather chair. D'Amico sat, keeping his back straight and his hands folded, and looked at Wolfe with the expression of a man about to discuss something distasteful but necessary. He said he was a valet,
leave before I get bored.
not a butler or a houseman, but a gentleman's gentleman. He had served the same employer for 20 years. Wolfe asked who the employer was. D'Amico said it was Arthur Vane. The name settled into the room like smoke. Arthur Vane was a Broadway producer known for his temper, his hits, and his ability to make enemies faster than most people make friends. He was also famous for being a recluse who lived in a penthouse that was harder to enter than Fort Knox and twice as well guarded. Wolfe raised an eyebrow and asked what a valet to a recluse wanted with a private detective. D'Amico said he wanted us to find a mask, an iron mask. It was a prop from Vane's first production, a disaster that had closed after 3 nights but launched Vane's career because of the scandal it caused. The mask was heavy, rusted and ugly, but Vane kept it on a pedestal in his study as a reminder of his beginnings. Yesterday, it had vanished. Wolfe asked why Vane had not called the police. D'Amico said Vane trusted no one, not even the police. He did not know D'Amico was here, and if he found out, D'Amico would be dismissed immediately. But D'Amico was worried because the mask had not simply been stolen. It had been replaced with a perfect replica made of papier-mâché and painted to look like iron. Only someone who knew the original intimately could have created such a copy, and only someone with access to the penthouse could have made the switch. Wolfe leaned back and asked who had such access. D'Amico said there were 5 people besides himself and Vane. The cook, the secretary, the young actress Vane was currently mentoring, and Vane's estranged son who had recently returned to the family fold. Wolfe closed his eyes. I recognized the signs. He was intrigued not by the theft, but by the replacement. A simple thief takes and runs. A psychological thief takes and replaces, creating a game of deception that appeals to Wolfe's appreciation for the complexities of human nature. D'Amico placed an envelope on the desk containing $5,000 cash and said he wanted the real mask found and returned before Vane discovered the deception. Wolfe opened his eyes, looked at the money, and said he would take the case. Wolfe let the silence sit a full 10 seconds after D'Amico left, which is a long time when there are $100 bills staring at you from an envelope. Then he told me the money would be deposited in our account and that there would be no refund under any circumstances, including failure, disappointment, or moral outrage.
You're hysterical. Get out of my sight.
I asked
You ruined
why
everything.
a valet would mortgage his future over stolen hardware, since most domestic help prefer to keep their jobs rather than play detective. His eyes shifted to me and held steady when I put the question. He said that Arthur Vane's temper had grown worse lately, and his trust in people had grown smaller. If Vane discovered that someone inside his household had dared to tamper with something he considered sacred, the result would be chaos. Jobs would be lost, reputations ruined, and there was something else. A man like Vane, with money and a grudge, could be dangerous when his symbolic possessions were violated. Wolfe nodded once, as if that item had been needed to justify his decision, but he had expected it all along. He asked for the names and precise functions of the 5 people with access. D'Amico produced another envelope containing a typed sheet, which impressed me. Most clients come in with sob stories and half-baked theories, but not many with memoranda on bond paper. I read the list aloud. The cook was Martin Kroll, age 52, with a reputation for Hungarian stews and Hungarian opinions, both of them strong. The secretary was Lionel Pierce, early 30s, Columbia graduate, former playwright who had decided that writing other people's letters was safer than writing his own plays. The actress was Lila Dane, 23,
Money
brunette,
was already in the envelope
alleged
when I picked it
discovery
up.
of veins, currently living in the guest
I
suite
just
and
delivered
studying lines for a role she did not yet have. The son was Eric Vane, 28, advertising background, reconciled with his father 3 months ago under circumstances D'Amico described as strained but cordial, like a truce between 2 countries that still keep tanks fueled. Wolfe said he would not insult D'Amico by asking whether he himself had done it, which of course was exactly what he had just done. Then he asked for details of the substitution. When had the mask last been seen? By whom? Under what illumination, and at what distance? Those questions were not random. Wolfe likes his facts the way Fritz likes his veal, precise and trimmed. The last confirmed sighting had been 2 nights earlier at 11, when D'Amico closed the study and checked the pedestal as part of his nightly circuit. The mask sat under a glass dome, locked. Yesterday at 4 in the afternoon, the dome had still been locked. But when Vane asked for the mask to be moved to the music room for a private meeting, D'Amico had removed the dome and realized the weight and texture were wrong. A closer look showed the forgery. He had made an excuse about the pedestal developing a wobble and postponed the transfer. Wolfe asked what would happen if D'Amico was dismissed. The valet replied that for 20 years he had kept order in that home, watching Vane build his world out of work and fury. He knew how brittle it was. If someone was playing a game using that mask, it would not end with an object returned or not returned. It would end with people destroyed, and there were others less prepared than himself. Wolfe dislikes melodrama, but he has a soft spot for people who recognize the consequences of folly and still try to dodge them. He told D'Amico to behave normally for the next 48 hours. No
I
hint,
followed the money trail
no
just
extra
like you
glance
asked.
at the
It
pedestal,
leads straight to
no
Commissioner
change in
Patton's office.
routine.
We have
If
to move
Vane
fast
asked
before they
again
bury
about the
it.
mask, he was to stall as before. Under no circumstances was he to mention outside help. After D'Amico left, I waited while Wolfe fondled the envelope of cash, then deposited it in his drawer. He took a long swallow of beer and let out air through his nose. "I suppose this means I'm seeing a penthouse instead of a movie tonight," I said. "Pfui. You would have gone to a movie uninvited and alone. This at least supplies you with conversation." "Sure. I've always wanted to chat with the sacred Iron Mask." He half closed his eyes, which means he is constructing something in his head and does not want it jostled. When he spoke, the words came slow and orderly, like freight cars coupling. "We have a theft that is not a theft, but a statement. The author of the statement is within a confined circle and has arranged the performance within a confined space. The object itself is worthless. Its value is symbolic. Therefore, the motive is also symbolic. Power, fear, revenge, perhaps a test." His lips curled. "Arthur Vane has assembled around him a household of dependents. One of them has chosen to remind him that dependence is not submission. In other words, somebody is yanking his chain.
It was in that
If you
moment
insist
Eric
on
Vane
barbarous
realized
phrasing,
his
yes,
luck had finally
you will go
run
there
out.
this evening. Call D'Amico from the corner when you arrive. He will admit you as a representative of a security firm engaged to review the penthouse's precautions. He will arrange for you to see the study, the mask, and the possible culprits. You will observe. You will listen. You will not improvise without necessity." "Who? Me?" He ignored that. Particular attention to the son and the actress. Their positions are least secure, and therefore most volatile. The cook and secretary may harbor resentments, but resentment in the young produces different patterns than resentment in the old. Note any object in that study that appears newly placed or recently removed. Also any indication that Vane himself is aware of an intrusion beyond what we know. I asked whether he intended to meet Vane in person. His mouth folded in on itself like a closing purse. "If I can avoid receiving a Broadway producer in this room, I shall. The few I've encountered were noisy, demanding, and incapable of listening. For now, I require information, not histrionics. If I get offered a part in his next show, should I accept? You're not equipped to act. That depends on the audience," I told him, and went to arrange my evening with a valet, a sacred mask, and a penthouse full of people who were about to discover that their quiet world had developed a crack. At 8:30 that evening, I was in a taxi heading uptown, watching the city lights blur past like a neon fever dream.
By the gates.
Fritz had
That's
made
him.
it clear that skipping dinner for the sake of commerce was becoming a habit he disapproved of, and I had promised him a detailed expense report on my survival. The cab dropped me a block from Arthur Vane's building, one of those limestone monuments to money that lined Central Park West like expensive tombstones. I called D'Amico from a corner phone booth. His voice came through steady and clipped, telling me to present myself at the main entrance in exactly 3 minutes and give the doorman a name he had arranged. When I did, the doorman looked me over with the practiced eye of a man who had spent years deciding who belonged in marble lobbies and who belonged on the sidewalk. Whatever D'Amico had told him was sufficient. He waved me toward an elevator that moved with the whisper quiet efficiency that money buys. D'Amico met me on the top floor, standing in a foyer that probably cost more to decorate than most people earn in a year. In his natural habitat, he looked even more like a vertical line drawn with architectural precision. He led me down a hallway wide enough for a small parade, past a kitchen where I glimpsed a heavy-set woman with iron-gray hair attacking vegetables with the kind of vigor that suggested she was imagining they were someone's neck. The study was at the end of the hall, a room that managed to feel both spacious and suffocating. Dark wood panels climbed to a coffered ceiling, and the walls displayed theater memorabilia like religious artifacts. In the center stood the pedestal, waist-high, topped with its glass dome. Beneath the dome sat what was supposed to be the Iron Mask. I walked around it slowly, keeping my expression
Order in the
neutral.
court. I will
The
not
craftsmanship
tolerate this
was
behavior.
impressive. Whoever had
defendant
made
is
this knew
remanded
the
into
original
custody.
intimately, down to the pattern of rust stains and the asymmetry of the eye holes. D'Amico produced a key and lifted the dome with the care of a man handling explosives. I reached out and tapped the mask with my knuckle. Instead of a metallic ring, there was a dull thud. I lifted it. It weighed about as much as a hat. Interesting development, I said, setting it back down. When did the original return? D'Amico's face remained expressionless, but his hands were steadier than they had been in Wolfe's office. This afternoon, I discovered it when I came to check the study at 4 o'clock. The papier-mâché version had been removed. This was in its place. So our artist was playing a more complex game than simple theft. Someone had taken the mask, replaced it with a fake, then returned the original and removed the fake. It was the kind of psychological chess match that would appeal to Wolfe's appreciation for human complexity. Who had access to the study this afternoon? I asked. Everyone was here. Mr. Vane was in meetings until 5. Miss Dane was rehearsing in the music room. Mr. Pierce was in his office. Eric was in and out. Marta was preparing dinner. He paused. I was out for 2 hours purchasing supplies. The door opened behind us. A thin man with receding hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose entered, stopping short when he saw
Welcome
me.
to the house. I
This
trust you
was
found the
Lionel
location
Pierce,
agreeable.
the
Perfectly,
secretary,
thank you, D'Amico.
and he
A
had the look
marvelous
of someone
setup.
who had been running a race in a library and losing. D'Amico made introductions. Pierce's handshake was damp and brief. Security
It wasn't the money, Wolfe.
consultation.
It was the
Pierce
land
repeated,
itself.
his eyes
Look
flicking to
here,
the
where the
mask.
property lines meet the
I
new
hadn't
highway
realized
proposal.
Arthur was concerned enough to hire outside help. Routine review, I said. Better to close the barn door before the horse gets ideas. Pierce laughed without humor. In this house, all the horses are already crazy. He moved to a desk piled with correspondence, shifting papers without organizing them. Arthur loves that thing more than any living person. Sometimes I think he talks to it. His voice carried the edge of a man who had spent too many years filing other people's dreams. I asked about keys to the study. Pierce said only Vane and D'Amico had them officially, but keys could be copied if you knew where to look. He glanced toward the door as if expecting trouble to walk through it. We left him to his papers and found Marta Kroll in the kitchen, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon that looked like it could double as a weapon. She was built like someone who had spent decades lifting heavy pots and heavier opinions. When D'Amico introduced me, she grunted without looking up. "Security," she said in an accent thick as her stews. "Only security this house needs is honest people. You cannot review honesty. You either have it or you do not." I asked about the household routine. She told me she cooked, she cleaned her kitchen, and she ignored the madness upstairs. The actress was always hungry, but never ate. The son drank too much coffee and paced at night. She heard things, footsteps, whispers. This house had no peace because the man at the top had no peace. "You hear footsteps in the study?" I asked. Her hands paused in their stirring. "Sometimes, late at night. But Mr. Vane, he does not sleep well. He walks his rooms like a ghost in his own house." D'Amico led me to the main salon, where the tension was thick enough to slice. Lila Dane sat on a sofa, reading a script but not
They think they
turning
know the
pages.
rules.
She was
But in this
beautiful
city,
in a
the only
calculated
rule
way.
is survival.
Every detail
And I
perfect,
intend to
like
survive.
a photograph of an actress rather than an actual person. By the window stood Eric Vane, looking out at a view that cost more than most people's houses. He was handsome in the careless way of someone who had never doubted his welcome anywhere. When D'Amico announced me, Lila jumped and dropped her script. Eric turned slowly, examining me with the casual arrogance of inherited authority. "Security consultant," I said, giving them the standard line. "Is Arthur in danger?" Lila asked, her voice breathy and theatrical. Eric snorted.
They used the mask as a distraction. It was
Hiring a guard is just another way to
worthless.
tighten the leash.
The real target was the
He
emeralds,
walked
and
to
now
the
they're
bar,
gone.
poured himself a drink, not offering one to anyone. "Going to search our rooms?" "Just checking the perimeter." "The perimeter's fine," Eric said, looking at Lila when he said it. "The rot's on the inside." Lila flushed and looked away. There was history there, and not the pleasant kind. I asked about the mask. Lila shuddered and said she hated it, that it looked like a dead face. Eric smiled over his glass and said it was the only honest thing in the house, because it didn't pretend to be anything but a cage. I'd seen enough. The household was a powder keg of resentments, fears, and competing loyalties. Everyone had motive to hurt Vane, and everyone had opportunity. But the mask's return suggested something more complex than simple revenge. Someone was playing a game with rules I didn't understand yet. D'Amico walked me to the elevator. I told him to maintain normal routine and call me if the temperature rose any higher. The elevator carried me down through layers of expensive air, and I walked out past the doorman into the October night, my mind cataloging impressions. Pierce, the nervous wreck, Marta, the angry observer, Lila, the frightened bird, and Eric, the resentful prince. Any one of them could have orchestrated the mask's journey. But which one was conducting this particular symphony of nerves? And what did they hope to accomplish when the final note was played? I got back to the brownstone at 10:15 to find Wolfe in the office with a book, a glass of beer, and the expression of a man who had been comfortable while others worked. He marked his place and looked at me with the patience of someone waiting for a report he had already half composed in his mind. I took the red leather chair and gave him the complete picture, starting with the doorman's professional scrutiny and ending with Eric's comment about the rot being on the inside. Wolfe listened with his eyes half closed, interrupting only to clarify distances and timing, which are his favorite details when constructing theories. When I finished, he sat silent for a full minute, then reached for his beer and took a long swallow. "The return of the mask," he said finally, "transforms this from theft to theater. Someone removed a sacred object, demonstrated the ability to violate Vane's inner sanctum, then returned it as if to say the violation itself was the message, not the possession." "Then why the papier-mâché copy?" I asked. "Why not just take it and bring it back?" "Because the copy extends the performance. It proves forethought, skill, and intimate knowledge. It also creates a period during which the perpetrator observes reactions." His lips pushed out
Connect me
and
to
pulled
Sector
back.
3, quickly.
"This person is not stealing.
Hold the
This
line, one
person
moment,
is
please.
I
teaching."
need that connection now.
Teaching what? That dependence is mutual, that the powerful are vulnerable. That control is an illusion. He set down his glass with the precision of a chess player positioning a piece. "The question is whether the lesson is complete or merely beginning." I described the household dynamics in detail, particularly the tension between Eric and Lila, Pierce's nervous energy,
Everything's
and
accounted
Marta's
for.
simmering
Good.
resentment.
Now disappear.
Wolfe wanted specifics about sight lines, access patterns, and the physical security of the study. I told him the door was solid, the dome locked, and only Vane and D'Amico officially had keys. "The son and the actress interest me," Wolfe said. "Young people confuse passion with alliance, and both can motivate elaborate deceptions. The secretary also bears examination. A playwright who abandoned his craft to serve another man's vision suggests either pragmatism or cowardice, both of which can curdle into something more active." He dismissed me with instructions
It's not metal
to
at
sleep
all,
well
Chief.
and be prepared for
It's a
investigation in the morning. I went to bed thinking about iron masks and papier-mâché substitutes, and woke up ready to dig into the backgrounds of people who lived in other people's houses and harbored other people's resentments. Friday morning, I spent doing what I do best, learning things about people they would prefer I didn't know. A few calls to theatrical agents revealed that Lionel Pierce had written 3 plays in recent years, all rejected, but the rejections from Vane's company were particularly brutal. One note, preserved by a sympathetic agent, read, "You have the soul of a clerk, Lionel. Stop trying to be an artist." That was enough motivation to rearrange more than furniture. Lila Dane's history was thinner but more interesting. A photographer friend who knew the theater gossip told me she had been dating a set designer named Marcos before moving into Vane's penthouse. Marcos had been fired from Vane's last production for creative differences, which usually meant screaming matches. Lila had broken up with him the same week she moved in with Vane. My friend mentioned that Marcos was known for his skill with props, specifically making fake things look authentically real. Eric Vane's advertising career had ended with his firing for misappropriation of resources, which usually meant using company funds for personal entertainment. A charming secretary let slip that Eric had been deep in debt to bookmakers. His reconciliation with his father 3 months ago coincided perfectly with those debts being cleared. A prodigal son returning not for forgiveness, but for the family wallet. Marta Krall was harder to trace, but I found a former employer who remembered her vividly. A wonderful cook, the woman said, but with a strange habit of rearranging things. Not stealing, just moving objects from room to room because she felt the house needed balance. They had let her go because it was unnerving to find paintings relocated overnight. I returned to report these findings at 11:30. Wolfe absorbed them without comment until I mentioned the set designer boyfriend and his expertise with theatrical props. A connection to the mechanics of deception, he murmured. But Miss Dane currently lacks the access that residence provides, unless the former boyfriend remains in the picture through her. She lives there now, I pointed out. And maybe Marcos is still pulling strings from the wings. Possible. But the physical substitution required opportunity and privacy. D'Amico indicated everyone was accounted for during his absence. The phone rang. I answered to hear D'Amico's voice, tighter than usual, asking for Mr. Wolfe. I explained about the phone policy and put him on speaker. His words came controlled but urgent. Arthur Vane had discovered the deception an hour earlier. He had picked up the mask to show a visiting producer and immediately detected the substitution. The producer had left embarrassed, and Vane was now in a fury, demanding answers from everyone.
By the gates.
He had locked the study and announced no one could leave until he found the culprit. D'Amico had slipped away to call, but had perhaps minutes before his absence was noticed. Wolfe asked how Vane had detected what D'Amico had missed. The answer was precise. Vane regularly examined a small inscription he had carved inside the mask years ago as a private mark. The current mask lacked this detail entirely. So he had a third mask now, good enough to fool a professional valet, but not the obsessive owner. Someone was escalating their psychological game, and they were doing it with increasing precision and malice. Wolfe told D'Amico to return immediately, show concern, but not panic, and observe who seemed surprised by Vane's discovery and who did not. The call ended without pleasantries. "This is getting complicated," I said. "On the contrary, it is becoming clear." Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Someone is dismantling Arthur Vane's sense of control piece by piece. The perpetrator seeks not money or escape, but Vane's destruction through his own reactions to systematic violation. He opened his eyes and looked at me directly. "You will return there this evening. By then, the immediate storm will have passed, but the psychological damage will be visible. I want to know who slept last night and who did not, who can meet eyes and who cannot. The mask itself has become irrelevant. What matters now is the pattern of fear and guilt it has created,
The only rule
and
is
who is
survival.
conducting this particular
And I
symphony
intend
of
to survive.
nerves." The afternoon crawled by while I typed reports and tried not to think about 5 people trapped in a penthouse with an enraged Broadway producer. Wolfe spent the hours reading, occasionally making notes on a pad he kept angled away from my view, which meant he was constructing theories he didn't want disturbed by premature questions. At 4 o'clock, he went up to the plant rooms, and at 6 he descended with the satisfied expression of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that behaved predictably. Over dinner, Fritz served lamb with rosemary that would have made poets weep, but conversation was made.
They used the
Wolfe
mask as a
dislikes
distraction.
mixing digestion with
papier-mâché,
speculation,
worthless.
and I had learned
The
that
real
pushing him
target was
during
the
meals
emeralds, and
produced
now they're
nothing but
gone.
indigestion for both of us. After coffee, he returned to the office and told me to call D'Amico for a status report before heading uptown. D'Amico answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the strain of a man who had spent hours maintaining composure while chaos swirled around him. Vane had interrogated each household member individually in the study, emerging after each session more furious than before. No one had confessed. No one had offered useful information. The mask remained missing, and Vane had announced that until it reappeared, everyone's movements would be monitored and all personal time suspended. Then D'Amico dropped the second bomb. Arthur Vane's private journal was missing from his bedroom. It had been there yesterday morning when D'Amico made the bed, but this afternoon the drawer where Vane kept it was empty. Vane had not yet noticed, and D'Amico had not mentioned it. Wolfe's reaction was immediate and sharp. Describe this journal. Personal observations, thoughts about productions, people, business dealings. He's kept one for 30 years. Black leather, about the size of a ledger book. He writes in it every night before bed. When the call ended, Wolfe sat motionless for 30 seconds before speaking. The mask was theater. The journal is ammunition. Our perpetrator has escalated from psychological games to actual leverage. Arthur Vane's unguarded thoughts about everyone in his life constitute a weapon far more dangerous than any missing prop. I arrived at the penthouse at 7 to find D'Amico looking like he had aged 5 years in one day. The foyer felt different, the air thick with tension that had settled into the walls like smoke. He led me toward the salon, speaking in whispers about the afternoon's carnage. Vane had accused Marta of witchcraft because of her habit of moving objects. He had told Pierce he was incompetent and disloyal. He had called Lila a parasite and Eric a disappointment. In the salon, the survivors of Vane's interrogation sat like shell-shocked soldiers.
It wasn't the
Lila
money,
huddled in
Wolfe.
a chair,
It was the
her
land
eyes red
itself.
but dry.
Look here, where the property
Pierce
lines meet the new
occupied a
highway
corner with a
proposal.
legal pad, though his hands shook too much to write anything useful. Eric paced by the window, drink in hand, the ice clinking a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. And in the center of the room stood Arthur Vane himself. I had seen him at a distance before, but never close up. He was smaller than his legend suggested, but somehow filled more space than the room should have allowed. A compact man in his late 50s, silver threading his dark hair, eyes like drill bits. He wore a navy jacket without a tie, but the casual dress made him look more dangerous, not less. "So you're the security consultant my valet hired behind my back," he said when D'Amico introduced me. His voice carried the projection of a man accustomed to filling theaters.
Connect me to Sector 3,
Strictly
quickly.
speaking, your valet engaged my employer.
Hold the line, one moment, please.
I need that
I'm
connection
just
now.
the legwork. And the mouth, I assume. You work for Nero Wolfe. Yes, I know the name. Sit down. I sat without argument. When visiting someone's private kingdom, you don't start by fighting about furniture. Vane remained standing, and everyone else watched him, not me. "Someone made a fool of me," he said. "In my own house. To my face.
Everything's accounted
Twice.
Good.
The first
Now
time they
disappear.
left a crude fake. Yesterday, they replaced it with something better. Now the mask is gone entirely, and I want to know who dared violate my sanctuary. I asked about the discovery. He had been showing the mask to another producer when he noticed the weight was wrong and the interior inscription was missing. The inscription, he explained, was a single word carved inside when he was young and desperate. Begin. No one else had ever seen it. So whoever made the copies had visual access but never examined the interior, I said. Precisely.
It's not metal at all,
They
Chief.
copied what they could see,
It's a fake.
not what they couldn't. Pierce spoke up from his corner. Unless they examined it long ago and forgot the detail. Memory can be imperfect. Vane's glare could have melted steel. You're not smart enough for this kind of thinking, Lionel. Don't try to be. I asked to interview each person individually. Vane waved permission like a director approving a scene change. I started with Pierce in the library, where he poured brandy with shaking hands. He thinks I did it for revenge, Pierce said, as if I'd risk everything over rejected plays. But I know who has the imagination for something this elaborate. Eric. He's been watching his father, timing routines, studying him like a production to be dismantled. Marta was in the kitchen, attacking already clean counters with savage intensity. Everyone here behaved strangely, she said without looking up. The actress pretends to love an old man.
The eagle's
son
nest
pretends to
has been
forgive an unforgiving father. The
I repeat,
secretary pretends he
compromised.
chose this life. And Mr. Vane pretends he is loved when he is only feared. Lila sat in the music room looking younger than her 23 years. I don't know about the mask, she said. Arthur thinks I'm involved because of Marco's, but I haven't spoken to him in months. Why did you move here? I asked. Because Arthur promised me a future. He said he would make me a star. Her voice cracked. Now I'm trapped with everyone hating me. Eric was the most interesting interview. He met me in the salon with a drink and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't take the mask, he said. I don't need pranks to hurt my father. I just need to wait for him to destroy himself, which he's doing quite efficiently. He raised his glass in a mock toast. Someone in this house is smarter than all of us. They've figured out that the best way to defeat Arthur Vane is to make him defeat himself. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something small but significant. On a hallway table, a vase had been moved slightly, leaving a
You
dust
think you can
outline.
lie to me and get away with it?
Under it, barely visible, was a scraping of blue wax. Modeling wax, the kind used by sculptors and prop makers. I pocketed the evidence and found D'Amico. Tell your employer that Nero Wolfe has information about his property and requires his presence tomorrow morning to discuss its return. All of them,
Honesty
the entire
is a
household.
sharp blade.
He
It
won't
cuts
come,
through the fat,
D'Amico
exposes
said.
the rot
He
underneath.
will when you mention that we
People
know
can't
about the
handle
journal
the
too.
truth.
D'Amico's face went pale, but he nodded. The game was entering its final act, and it was time to gather all the players on Wolfe's stage. I returned to the brownstone at 9:45 to find Wolfe in his chair with a book, a glass of beer, and the expression of a man who had spent the evening contemplating the predictable behavior of orchids while others dealt with the chaos of human nature. I placed the blue modeling wax on his desk blotter like evidence in a trial that was about to begin. He examined the sample under his desk lamp, rolling it between his fingers and bringing it close to his nose with the concentration he usually reserved for evaluating Fritz's sources. After a moment, he set it down and looked at me with the satisfaction of a man whose theory had just received confirmation. Professional quality modeling compound, he said, used for creating impressions and molds. Combined with the household dynamics you observed, it suggests our perpetrator required both access and technical assistance. The question is whether the assistance was knowing or unwitting. I gave him the complete report of my evening, including Vane's explosive discovery, the individual interviews, and the psychological battlefield the penthouse had become. Wolfe listened with his eyes half closed, occasionally asking for clarification about timing or
You
positioning.
think this is a game, don't
When
you,
I
Vane?
finished, he was silent for a full minute
I think you
before
need to leave
speaking.
before I get bored.
The return of the original mask, followed by its disappearance again, demonstrates escalating confidence, he said. Someone is no longer content with symbolic gestures. They have moved to direct confrontation, using Vane's own obsessions as weapons against him. And the
They know
journal
we were there
theft?
tonight. We have to
The
move the
journal
shipment now.
represents the final
too late.
escalation
The cops are
from
already watching
mockery
the docks.
to leverage.
We find
Whoever
out who
possesses
talked.
those private thoughts holds power over everyone Vane has written about, which presumably includes his entire household. Wolfe's lips pushed out and pulled back. We are no longer dealing with psychological theater. We are dealing with calculated warfare. I asked about the arrangements for tomorrow's gathering. Wolfe told me to call D'Amico and confirm that Vane would bring everyone at 11 o'clock. When I reached for the phone, Wolfe held up a hand. First, check the petty cash drawer. I want to verify the retainer is secure. I opened his desk drawer and stared into emptiness. The envelope containing $5,000 was gone. So was the modeling wax sample I had just placed on his desk. I closed the drawer, opened it again, then looked at Wolfe with the expression of a man whose reality had just shifted sideways. Gone, I said. Both the money and the wax. Clean as a whistle. For a man who considers rapid movement undignified, Wolfe can achieve remarkable speed when circumstances demand it. He rose, came around the desk, and examined the drawer himself. His face went through several expressions, none of them pleasant. "Fritz," he called. Fritz appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting in the hallway for summons. Wolfe asked if anyone had entered the office since we had retired. Fritz assured him no one had crossed that threshold. I believed him absolutely. If Fritz said the office had been secure, then whoever had violated it possessed skills that went beyond ordinary burglary. After Fritz left, Wolfe settled back into his chair with the deliberate control of a man containing volcanic forces. He stared at the open drawer for 30 seconds before speaking. "Someone entered this room," he said, his voice carrying the chill of winter mornings. "Defeated our security measures, removed evidence and payment connected to their case, then departed without leaving detectable traces. This transforms us from hired investigators to active participants in their design. I don't like the implications of that. The implications are clear. Whoever orchestrated the campaign against Vane has now extended it to include us.
I won't let you get away with
We are
this.
no
You hear
longer
me?
observing
You're
their theater.
hysterical. Get out of my
We
sight.
are
You
performing
ruined
it.
everything. Don't you
The
dare raise your voice
violation
at
of
me,
his
boy.
sanctuary had affected Wolfe more than he was showing. His hands were perfectly steady, but his breathing had changed. There was a quality to his stillness that suggested a predator calculating angles of attack. "Why take the money?" I asked. "They already have Vane's journal for leverage." "To demonstrate capability, to prove they can reach anyone, anywhere, and possibly," his eyes narrowed, "to ensure we remain committed to resolving this matter, regardless of payment." Saturday morning brought the kind of October weather that makes you believe in fresh starts, which seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. At 10:30, I arranged chairs in the office, creating the semicircle Wolfe preferred for his expositions. Fritz prepared coffee and pastries with his usual precision, though I suspected no one would have appetite for either. The doorbell began its performance at 10:50. First came Lionel Pierce, clutching his briefcase like a life preserver. Then Marta Krall, wearing an expression that could have curdled fresh milk. Lila Dane arrived with red eyes and trembling hands, followed by Eric Vane, who seemed to view the proceedings as entertainment he hadn't paid for. At precisely 11 o'clock, Arthur Vane arrived with D'Amico in tow. Vane entered the office like a general inspecting conquered territory.
The money was already in
his
the
eyes
envelope when I picked it
cataloging
up.
everything from the orchids to the beer bottle.
I didn't count it, I just
He took
delivered
the
it.
chair closest to Wolfe's desk without invitation. "This had better justify the inconvenience," he said. "I was told you have information about my property." Wolfe descended at 11 sharp. He settled into his chair, arranged his yellow pencil precisely parallel to his blotter, and surveyed the assembled group with the detached interest of an entomologist examining specimens. He poured beer, watched the foam settle, and drank before acknowledging their existence. "You are here," he began, his voice carrying absolute authority, "because someone in this room has conducted a systematic campaign to destabilize Mr. Vane's sense of control and security. This campaign has employed theft, forgery, psychological manipulation, and now blackmail. Blackmail. Vane's voice cut through the room like a blade. The theft of your journal, containing 30 years of unguarded observations about colleagues, competitors, and associates, constitutes preparation for either blackmail or public destruction. The motive will determine which. Wolfe leaned back, his fingers laced across his middle. Before we proceed, I must inform you that this matter has become personal. Last night, someone entered this office and removed both the fee you paid and physical evidence connected to your case. Whoever is manipulating your household has chosen to include me in their design. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Eric stopped trying to look amused. The game had expanded beyond Vane's penthouse, and everyone in the room understood that Nero Wolfe's involvement was no longer a matter of professional courtesy. It was war. Wolfe let the word hang in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. War. Arthur Vane shifted in his chair, his eyes moving from face to face with the calculation of a general assessing
I followed
his
the money
troops
trail
for
just
signs
like
of
you asked.
mutiny.
It leads
The
straight to
others
Commissioner
watched him with the
Patton's
careful
office.
attention of
We have
people
to
who
move
understood
fast before
that
they
their
bury
immediate
it.
futures depended on his reaction to whatever Wolfe was about to reveal. Someone entered this office last night, Wolfe continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Defeated security measures that have protected this sanctuary for decades and removed both evidence and payment connected to your case. This transforms the matter from professional inquiry to personal affront. I do not tolerate such liberties. Pierce cleared his throat nervously. But surely that proves the perpetrator is someone outside our circle, someone with professional burglary skills. On the contrary, Wolfe replied. It proves the perpetrator has access to information about my household that only someone who has been here could possess. The theft was accomplished with intimate knowledge of our routines and security measures. He leaned back and surveyed the group with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens. We shall proceed through elimination. Each of you possessed motive and opportunity regarding the mask and journal. But the expansion of operations to include this office requires additional capabilities and connections. Wolfe turned his attention to Marta first. Mrs. Kroll, you have a documented compulsion for rearranging household objects to create what you perceive
Within that
as
moment,
proper
Eric
balance.
Vane realized his
However,
luck had
this
finally
campaign
run
required not rearrangement, but replacement, not balance, but calculated chaos. Your temperament is unsuited to sustained deception. Marta's jaw jutted defiantly, but she said nothing. Mr. Pierce, Wolfe continued, you harbor legitimate resentment over Mr. Vane's brutal rejection of your artistic aspirations. Yet you lack the nerve for direct confrontation. Your anger turns inward rather than outward, making you unsuitable for orchestrating psychological warfare. Pierce's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his briefcase. I would never risk my position over old grievances. Precisely. You're too cautious for such an enterprise. Wolfe's gaze shifted to D'Amico, who stood rigid by the door. Mr. D'Amico, you possess all the technical skills necessary for this operation. 20 years of managing Mr. Vane's life has given you unparalleled access and knowledge. Yet you came to me seeking protection for your employer, not destruction. Your motive runs counter to the observed actions. D'Amico's relief was visible, though he maintained his professional composure. Wolfe turned to Lila, who had gone pale as winter moonlight. Miss Dane, you maintain a connection to Marcos, a set designer with expertise in creating theatrical forgeries. You moved into Mr. Vane's residence immediately after ending your relationship with this man, who had been dismissed from one of Mr. Vane's productions under circumstances that would breed
by the
lasting
gates.
resentment.
That's him.
Lila's voice came out as barely a whisper. I haven't spoken to him in months. Haven't spoken to him, perhaps, but communication takes many forms. Wolfe's tone remained clinical, surgical. When did you last see him? The distinction hit her like a physical blow. Last week, he was outside the building, but we didn't talk. I swear we didn't talk. You acknowledged him, and he would have understood that acknowledgement as permission to proceed with plans you had previously discussed. Wolfe paused, letting the implication settle. You provided him with detailed descriptions of the mask's appearance, the household routines, and the security measures. He created the forgeries using his professional equipment and expertise. Tears began streaming down Lila's face. He said it would just be a prank, something to shake Arthur up, make him realize how controlling he'd become. I didn't know about the journal. I swear I didn't know he would go that far. Eric Vane had been listening with growing tension, his casual facade finally beginning to crack. This is ridiculous. She's a frightened girl who got manipulated by her ex-boyfriend. If anyone's to blame, it's Marcos. Mr. Marcos provided technical execution, Wolfe agreed. But he lacked the intimate knowledge of your father's psychology necessary to design such precisely targeted violations. He could not have known about the inscription inside the mask, the significance of the journal's hiding place, or the specific vulnerabilities that would produce maximum psychological damage. Wolfe's eyes fixed on Eric with the intensity of a spotlight. You, however, spent your childhood observing your father's obsessions, learning what mattered most to him, cataloging his fears and weaknesses. You knew about the inscription because you examined the mask years ago, before your estrangement. You understood that violating his most sacred possessions would be more devastating than any physical attack. Eric's smile had frozen into a grimace. You're guessing. You have no proof. I am deducing from established facts. You reconciled with your father 3 months ago, not for forgiveness, but for access. Your debts were cleared, your position restored, but your resentment remained. You cultivated Miss Dane's trust, learned about her former relationship with Marcos, and suggested she might use that connection to teach your father a lesson about control. The room had gone silent except for Lila's quiet sobbing and the ticking of the wall clock. Vane sat motionless, staring at his son with an expression that combined fury with something that might have been recognition. You provided the psychological blueprint, Wolfe continued relentlessly. Miss Dane provided the access and daily intelligence. Marcos provided the technical skill to create convincing forgeries, a partnership of resentment, naivety, and expertise, orchestrated by someone who understood that the most effective way to destroy Arthur Vane was to make him destroy himself through his own reactions to systematic violation. Eric's composure finally
I trust you found the
shattered.
location agreeable.
He
Perfectly,
destroyed
thank
me
you,
first.
Damico.
Every
marvelous
opportunity,
turnout.
every relationship, every dream. He made sure I failed at everything so I would come crawling back dependent on his charity. This was justice. This was patricide.
It wasn't the money, Wolfe.
Without the
It
inconvenience
was the
of
land
murder.
itself.
Wolfe
Look
said
here, where the
quietly.
property lines meet the
You
new
intended
highway
to
proposal.
use your father's own words against him. To demolish his reputation using the private thoughts he had confided to his journal over 30 years. Then position yourself to inherit his empire once his credibility was destroyed. Arthur Vane's voice, when it finally came, sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. The journal. Where is it? Eric met his father's eyes for the first time since the accusations began. Safe, along with 30 years of your real opinions about everyone who ever trusted you. Every cruel observation, every private betrayal, every moment when you revealed what you really think of the people who depend on you. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Wolfe reached for his beer and drank slowly, watching the family drama unfold with the detached interest of a theater critic observing a particularly well-constructed tragedy. The theft from this office, Wolfe said finally, was accomplished by Marcos, using information about our security measures that Miss Dane obtained during her visit here. The modeling wax Mr. Goodwin discovered was deliberately placed to implicate Marcos, while simultaneously providing him with access to this building through impressions taken from Mr. Goodwin's keys. I felt a chill as I realized how thoroughly I'd been used. Every handshake, every casual contact during my interviews had been an opportunity for reconnaissance. The campaign will end here, Wolfe announced. The journal will be returned, the masks will be recovered, and this household will resume its normal dysfunction. The alternative is police involvement and public scandal, which would destroy everyone present rather than merely rearranging the power structure. Eric laughed bitterly. And why would I agree to that? I hold all the cards now. Because
They
Wolfe
think they
said
know the
with quiet
rules.
confidence of a man
But in
who
this
had just
city,
checkmated
the only
an
rule
opponent.
is survival.
Your conspiracy
And I
has one
intend to
fatal flaw.
survive.
It requires continued cooperation from people who now understand they were manipulated. Miss Dane believed she was participating in a harmless prank. Marcos believed he was helping a former lover escape an oppressive situation. Neither of them signed up for blackmail and family destruction. He turned to Lila, whose tears had stopped, but whose face remained streaked and pale. Miss Dane, are you prepared to continue this campaign now that you understand its true purpose? She shook her head violently. No, I never wanted anyone to be hurt. I just wanted Arthur to see that people aren't possessions. And Marcos will find himself
They
facing
used the
charges of
mask as a
burglary
distraction.
and theft
It was
if this
papier
matter
mâché,
proceeds to its
worthless.
logical conclusion.
The real target was the
Wolfe
emeralds,
added.
and now they're gone.
I doubt his artistic temperament is suited to prison life. Eric's confident expression was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. The psychological weapon he had forged was disintegrating in his hands, leaving him exposed and alone. The journal, Vane repeated, his voice carrying the implacable force of a man who had built an empire through sheer will. Where is it? Eric looked around the room at faces that had turned from audience to jury. His grand gesture of rebellion had become a trap of his own making, and he was finally beginning to understand that some victories cost more than defeats. In a safety deposit box, he said finally. Downtown, the key is in my apartment. Wolfe nodded with satisfaction. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to retrieve it immediately. The masks will be returned by this evening, and Miss Dane will sever all contact with Marcos permanently. In return, Mr. Vane will not press charges, and this matter will be considered closed. The war was ending not with explosions, but with the quiet recognition that some battles destroy everyone who fights them. Eric Vane had learned what his father had always known, that power corrupts not just those who wield it, but those who seek to overthrow it through corruption of their own. The brownstone sanctuary had been violated, but it would be restored. The Vane household's dysfunction would continue, but within its familiar parameters. And Nero Wolfe would return to his orchids, having once again demonstrated that the most effective weapon against chaos is not force, but the relentless application of logic to human folly. The retrieval of Arthur Vane's journal proceeded with the grim efficiency of a funeral procession. Eric and I took a cab to his apartment on West End, a modern space that felt more like a hotel room than a home, expensive but empty of anything resembling warmth. He moved through it like a stranger, going directly to a desk drawer and producing a small brass key without ceremony or hesitation. The bank was 3 blocks away, one of those marble temples where even the air costs money. Eric signed the access log with hands that had developed a slight tremor, and we were escorted to the vault by a guard who looked capable of bench-pressing both of us without breaking a sweat. The safety deposit box contained the journal and a manila envelope filled with photographs that made Eric's blackmail scheme considerably more sophisticated than simple literary theft. Back at the brownstone, the office felt like a courtroom awaiting verdict.
But the city's
Vane had not moved from his chair, maintaining the rigid posture of a man who refused to show weakness, even when his world was crumbling around
Hold the
him.
line, one moment, please.
The others remained in their positions like actors, frozen between scenes, waiting for direction that might never come. I handed the journal and envelope to Wolfe, who examined both briefly before passing them to Vane without comment. The producer's hands trembled slightly as he took them, the first crack I'd seen in his carefully maintained armor. He opened the journal to verify its authenticity, then closed it and
Everything's
held it
accounted
against
for.
his chest
Good.
like a shield
Now
against
disappear.
further violation. Wolfe leaned back and surveyed the assembled group with the detached interest of a scientist observing specimens. Your property is restored, Mr. Vane. The question now is what you intend to do with this knowledge. Vane looked at his son with an expression that combined fury with something that might have been recognition. Pack your things, Eric. You're done here. Eric accepted the banishment without argument. He had played for the throne and lost, and exile was the traditional penalty for failed coups. The game was over.
It's not
and
metal
everyone
at
in the
all,
room
Chief.
understood the rules.
It's a fake.
The masks must also be recovered, Wolfe continued. Mr. Goodwin will accompany Eric to retrieve them from Marcos immediately. The drive to Brooklyn took us through Saturday afternoon traffic to a converted warehouse that smelled of turpentine and broken dreams. Marcos answered the door looking like someone who had been expecting bad news and was relieved to finally receive it. His studio was cluttered with theatrical props and half-finished sculptures, including 3 iron masks arranged on a workbench like evidence in a trial. Beautiful work, I admitted, examining the craftsmanship. Almost worth the felony charges you're about to face. Marcos was younger than I expected, with the kind of artistic dishevelment that takes effort to maintain. Lila said it was just a prank, he
Objection,
said
Your Honor.
defensively.
That evidence is clearly hearsay and
Something to
inadmissible
shake
in
up
this
a
court.
controlling
The
old
objection is
man.
noted, Counselor, but overruled.
I didn't know about
the jury
the
will hear the
blackmail.
testimony.
Nobody ever does, I replied. That's how these things work. Someone convinces you you're fighting tyranny when really you're just helping them commit crimes. We loaded the masks and returned to Manhattan as the afternoon faded into evening. Wolfe had dismissed everyone except Vane and D'Amico, and the office felt less crowded but more tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. I placed the box containing all 3 masks on Wolfe's desk. He examined each one methodically, comparing the forgeries to the original with the attention he usually reserved for evaluating orchids. Finally, he nodded and returned his attention to Vane. Your household has become a theater of resentments, Wolfe observed. Continuing that performance will eventually consume everyone involved. Your son learned from an expert teacher. He simply applied your methods to a different target.
The money was already in
Vane's
the
jaw
envelope when I
tightened.
picked it up.
You're suggesting I should forgive him?
I didn't count it, I just delivered
I'm
it.
suggesting you recognize that revenge is expensive, and you have already paid a substantial price for the privilege of being right. Wolfe reached for his beer. Productions end. Companies dissolve. Empires crumble. But the choice between destruction and reconstruction remains yours to make. Vane stood slowly, gathering the journal and original mask. He looked at Wolfe with an expression that might have been respect or hatred. I'll consider your advice, he said finally, but I make no promises. After they left, I poured myself a drink and settled into the red leather chair. The case was closed, but something felt unfinished, like a play that had ended without a proper final scene. The phone rang an hour later. D'Amico's voice came through tired but calm. Mr. Goodwin, thought you should know. Mr. Vane burned the journal. Every page. Watched them turn to ash in the fireplace. Wise decision, I said. Some things are better left unwritten. And he's ordered the mask melted down. Says he's done with symbols. From now on, he'll rely on what he can see with his own eyes. I relayed this to Wolfe, who nodded slowly. Destruction is often the final act of creation, he murmured. Mr. Vane has learned that true control requires letting go of the things that control us. A valuable lesson, though an expensive one. Fritz appeared to announce that dinner was ready. Wolfe rose with the satisfied expression of a man who had restored order to a chaotic world. The brownstone sanctuary had been
They think they
violated
know the
and
rules.
repaired, our fee
But in this
recovered,
city,
and
the only
justice
rule is
served in the
survival.
peculiar way that justice
intend to
operates in
survive.
Nero Wolfe's universe. As we headed to the dining room, I reflected on iron masks and paper forgeries, on sons who learned too well from tyrannical fathers, and on the thin line between justice and revenge. It was just another Saturday in our world, where logic defeats chaos and dinner is always served on time, regardless of how many families destroy themselves in our office along the way. Dinner that evening was shad roe with Creole sauce, a dish that Fritz prepares with the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. The roe was firm, yet yielding. The sauce, a complex harmony of
They used
sharp
the
and
mask as a
savory
distraction.
notes that
It
demanded
was
complete
papier-mâché,
attention.
worthless.
Wolfe
The real
ate with
target
his
was the
usual
emeralds,
focused
and now they're
intensity,
gone.
eyes closed as he chewed, shutting out the world of thieves and dysfunctional families to commune entirely with culinary perfection. I ate with equal enthusiasm but less concentration, my mind drifting back to Arthur Vane standing by his fireplace, watching 30 years of secrets turn to ash. There is a specific silence that settles over the brownstone after a case concludes, usually feeling like relief. Tonight, it felt like a question mark. The mechanics of our solution were sound, but something nagged at me like a picture frame hung slightly askew. I waited until coffee was served, and Wolfe had settled behind his desk before poking at my doubts. It worked out neatly, I observed, watching him pour beer. Maybe too neatly. D'Amico is the perfect valet. He sees everything, knows everything, anticipates everything, yet he claims he didn't know Eric was gaslighting his father. He missed what was happening right under his nose. Wolfe wiped foam from his lip. You assume Mr. D'Amico missed something. That would insult his professional competence, which is formidable. Then why hire us? If he knew Eric was the culprit, why spend $5,000 of his own money on a detective? Why not just tell Vane? Because telling Mr. Vane would have resulted in Eric's arrest and disinheritance. Mr. D'Amico desired neither the son's destruction nor the father's continued tyranny. He wanted resolution that would neutralize the household's toxicity without destroying its inhabitants.
It was in that moment Eric
Wolfe's
Vane
eyes
realized
gleamed.
his luck had finally
He hired
run
me
out.
not to discover truth, Archie, but to manage its revelation. The implications hit me like a cold slap. You're saying D'Amico orchestrated this? Let Eric torture his father for weeks? I'm saying Mr. D'Amico understood his employer's psychology better than anyone. He knew Vane would never relinquish control, represented by that mask and journal, unless forced by traumatic shock. Eric provided the shock. D'Amico provided the safety net by engaging me to ensure the explosion was controlled. The doorbell rang at 9:30. Through the one-way glass stood Pierre D'Amico, looking as immaculate as if he hadn't just presided over his employer's ego demolition. I opened the door. "We were just discussing you," I said. "Wolfe thinks you're a genius. I think you're a gambler. Both can be true." D'Amico replied smoothly. "I wish to see Mr. Wolfe briefly." In the office, he declined the red leather chair, maintaining his perpetual duty posture. He placed a fresh envelope on Wolfe's blotter. A bonus. Mr. Vane was generous in his relief this evening. He believes he made the decision to burn the journal entirely on his own. He feels liberated. Wolfe examined the envelope without touching it. And the mask? Melted. He poured the metal into a mold for a doorstop. Says he wants it useful rather than symbolic. A ghost smile touched D'Amico's lips. The household will be quieter now. Eric
There,
left with a
by
handshake.
the gates.
Not
That's him.
handcuffs. More than I dared hope.
Are you certain?
You took significant risk, Wolfe noted. If I had failed, or if Vane proved less receptive to logic, you would have presided over catastrophe. I have served Arthur Vane 20 years. I know the difference between tragedy and drama. This was drama. It required climax, not funeral. You knew, I said, unable to contain it. You knew it was Eric from the start. D'Amico's gray eyes met mine. I saw a young man trying to break a window for air. I merely ensured he didn't cut his wrists on the glass. He looked back at Wolfe. The irony is the object's title, the Iron Mask. Legend says it hid a prisoner's identity, kept him from being recognized. And, Wolfe prompted, in our house, the mask didn't hide a prisoner. It created one. Mr. Vane was trapped behind it as much as anyone. Today, for the first time in decades, I saw his face without it. D'Amico bowed slightly. Respect between equals, rather than servitude. Thank you, gentlemen. You provided the necessary catalyst. He departed into the night, a shadow returning to shadows he managed so expertly.
But the city
When I returned,
ran
Wolfe had
deeper
counted
than
the envelope's
puddles
contents and placed them in the
Connect me to
safe.
Sector 3, quickly.
So, I said, settling at my desk.
Hold the line 1 moment,
The
please.
client
I need that
was the
connection now.
mastermind. The victim was the villain, and the detective was the instrument. The detective, Wolfe corrected, reopening his book, was the editor. We took a messy manuscript and provided coherent ending. That is a service worth compensation. And the office break-in. Did D'Amico anticipate that too? He likely suspected Eric would attempt something desperate. He trusted
Everything's
us to
accounted
defend
for.
ourselves.
Good.
Which we did,
Now disappear.
eventually. Wolfe found his page. It is satisfactory, Archie. The brownstone is secure, the account replenished, and Mr. Vane has learned that living behind an iron mask eventually makes one forget how to breathe. I swiveled toward my typewriter, pulling out the case notes. The blue wax, the timeline, the suspect list. All there, the complete human comedy reduced to facts on bond paper. I filed the sheet under V for Vane and closed the drawer. You know what bothers me most? I said. D'Amico played us like a violin.
It's not metal at
and
all,
we never
Chief.
heard the music until the
It's a
concert
fake.
was over. Phooey. We heard it perfectly. We simply chose to dance rather than conduct. Wolfe turned a page. Mr. D'Amico understood that some problems require surgical precision rather than sledgehammers. He provided the scalpel. We provided the steady hand. The brownstone settled into its familiar post-case quiet, not empty silence, but fullness of things that didn't need saying. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of ambition and disappointment. But inside our sanctuary, order had been restored through the
They know we were
careful
there
application
tonight. We have to move
of
the shipment
logic
now.
to
It's
human
too late.
chaos.
The cops are already watching the
Just
docks.
another evening in the
We
world
find out
of
who
Nero
talked.
Wolfe, where justice operates by rules that make sense only after you've seen them applied, and where the most dangerous person in any room might be the one who appears to serve rather than command. The case of the Iron Mask was closed, but its lessons would linger like the taste of Fritz's perfect sauce, complex and satisfying long after the meal had ended. Monday morning arrived with a kind of crisp autumn clarity that makes you believe the world might actually make sense, at least until lunch. I was in the office by 8:30, sorting through the usual collection of bills, inquiries, and invitations to events Wolfe would rather die than attend. The brownstone felt solid around me again, its sanctuary restored after Saturday's invasion. Fritz had scrubbed the office floor twice, as if soap and water could wash away the memory of violated security, and I had to admit the gesture was comforting. Wolfe descended at 9 sharp, fresh from his morning communion with the orchids, wearing the satisfied expression of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that grew predictably and never plotted against each other. He settled into his chair, arranged his pencils with geometric precision, and rang for beer. Only after completing his ritual did he acknowledge my existence with a glance that suggested he was prepared to hear about the consequences of our weekend's work. I gave him the complete aftermath, compiled from calls that had trickled in since Sunday evening. Arthur Vane had spent the weekend in what D'Amico described as productive solitude, emerging only to announce that the penthouse security system would be simplified and the household staff would receive new contracts with increased autonomy. The Iron Mask had indeed been melted down, poured into a mold that produced a serviceable doorstop, now holding open the study door. Vane had placed it there personally, telling D'Amico that symbols should serve practical purposes rather than collecting dust. Eric had departed for a retreat in Vermont, leaving behind only a brief note expressing gratitude for his father's restraint and a promise to write when he had something worth saying. Pierce had accepted a revised position that included script consultation.
I won't let you
His
get away
years
with
of
this. You hear
rejected
me?
plays
You're
suddenly
hysterical. Get out of my
transformed
sight.
from
You ruined
embarrassment
everything.
to
Don't you
qualification.
dare raise your voice at me, boy.
Marta continued ruling the kitchen with iron efficiency, though D'Amico reported she had stopped rearranging objects throughout the house, apparently satisfied that the household's balance had been properly restored. Wolfe absorbed these details without comment until I mentioned Lila Dane's situation. She had moved out of the penthouse Sunday morning but remained in the city, having accepted Vane's offer to finance her first genuine attempt at playwriting. The subject, according to D'Amico, was to be a drama about power, control, and the masks people wear to hide from themselves. Satisfactory, Wolfe murmured, reaching for his beer. Miss Dane has discovered that the most effective way to stop lying is to tell the truth disguised as art. Mr. Vane will recognize elements of his own story, which will give the work authenticity, even if the execution is flawed. You think she can actually write? I think she can try, which is sufficient. The attempt will be honest, and honesty is more than she has offered anyone thus far. He took a long swallow. Besides, the story has dramatic potential. A household of dependents who discover that their chains are largely self-forged, a patriarch who mistakes control for security, and a valet who understands that sometimes destruction is the kindest form of preservation.
The money was
Morning
already in the
proceeded
envelope
with its
when I picked
usual
it up.
rhythm. A woman called about a
I didn't
missing
count it, I just
inheritance
delivered
that
it.
turned out to be hidden in her late husband's fishing tackle box. A lawyer inquired about our rates for investigating jury tampering, routine business that required nothing more than competent attention and reasonable fees. By lunch, I'd almost filed the Iron Mask case into the mental drawer labeled "closed" with philosophical satisfaction. Fritz served lamb chops with rosemary, accompanied by his own commentary on the restoration of household order. He had noticed, he said, that the office felt lighter somehow, as if the violation of Saturday night had been not just repaired, but somehow transformed into strength. I agreed, though I couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that our sanctuary could be invaded and still remain fundamentally intact. After lunch, Wolfe returned to his desk with the deliberate movements of a man settling in for serious reflection. He opened his book but didn't read, instead staring at the wall where the safe held our restored retainer, plus D'Amico's generous bonus. The essential lesson, he said finally, is that Pierre D'Amico understood something his employer had forgotten. Objects acquire power only when we surrender our judgment to the meanings we attach to them. The mask ruled Archie Goodwin's life not because it was iron, but because he believed it represented his identity. And the journal? The journal was more dangerous because it contained actual power rather than symbolic power. 30 years of unguarded thoughts about colleagues and competitors could have destroyed multiple careers. Yet Vane burned it without reading it, which suggests he finally understood that some victories cost more than defeats. I leaned back in my chair, watching Wolfe's face as he worked through the implications. What about D'Amico? He orchestrated the whole thing, put everyone through hell, risked his own position.
I followed the money trail
Was
just
it
like you
worth it?
asked. It leads straight to
Mr.
Commissioner Patton's
D'Amico
office.
faced a
We
choice
have to
between
move
allowing
fast
his
before they bury
employer
it.
to destroy himself slowly through increasing paranoia and tyranny, or forcing a crisis that might produce either destruction or transformation. He chose the crisis and managed its progression to ensure the outcome favored transformation. Wolfe's lips pushed out and pulled back. It was a calculated risk by a man who understood that sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them fall far enough to recognize they need saving. The phone rang at 3:15. D'Amico's voice came through calm and professional, reporting that Arthur Vane wished to express his gratitude for our discretion and effectiveness. He had enclosed an additional payment with instructions that we were to consider ourselves retained for any future security consultations the household might require. Generous, I said after hanging up. Also smart. He's buying insurance that will keep our mouths shut about the family drama. He is ensuring continued access to competent investigation should the need arise, Wolfe corrected. Mr. Vane has learned that some problems require external perspective to resolve. That is wisdom, not bribery. The afternoon faded into evening with the comfortable rhythm of the household where everyone understands their role and performs it well. Fritz prepared dinner with his usual artistry.
It was in that
The
moment
smell
Eric
of
Vane
roasting duck
realized his
drifting
luck
from the
had
kitchen
finally
like
run
incense
out.
in a temple. Wolfe read his book, occasionally making notes on a pad he kept angled away from my view. I typed reports and answered correspondence, the familiar sounds of productivity filling the office. At 7 o'clock, we moved to the dining room, where Fritz had outdone himself with duck à l'orange, the skin crackling and the sauce perfectly balanced between sweet and tart. We ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the gentle clink of silverware and Wolfe's occasional murmur of appreciation. It was during the salad course that he finally offered his complete assessment of the case. The Iron Mask affair demonstrates the fundamental principle that governs all human relationships, he said, dabbing his lips with his napkin. Power is not taken, it is given. Arthur Vane ruled his household through fear and dependence, but only because his dependents chose to accept that arrangement. The moment they chose otherwise, his power evaporated. Even though he still had the money and owned the building. Money and property are tools, Archie, not sources of authority. Authority derives from the willingness of others to accept direction. When that willingness disappears, wealth becomes merely wealth, and ownership becomes merely possession. He reached for his wine glass. Mr. D'Amico understood this principle and applied it with surgical precision. After dinner, we returned to the office, where the evening light slanted through the windows in golden bars.
There.
Wolfe
By the
settled
gates.
behind his desk
That's
with a
him.
book of poetry, while I updated the
you
case
certain?
files and prepared invoices for our recent clients. The brownstone wrapped around us like a well-tailored coat, comfortable and protective. Tell me something, I said, looking up from my typing. If you were in D'Amico's position, would you have done it differently? Wolfe considered the question with the seriousness he reserved for matters of professional ethics. I would have been more direct. A conversation with Mr. Vane about the psychological damage his behavior was causing might have achieved the same result with less collateral trauma. However, I'm not a valet. I do not depend on my client's approval for my livelihood or my shelter. Mr. D'Amico operated under constraints that required more subtle methods. You admire what he did. I admire his competence. He identified a problem, developed a solution, and executed it with minimal permanent damage to any of the participants. That Eric Vane learned humility, that Arthur Vane learned flexibility, and that the household achieved a more sustainable balance are all positive outcomes. The methods were harsh, but the results justify the approach. The clock chimed 9, and Fritz appeared to clear away the coffee service. Another day. Another crisis resolved. Another demonstration that human folly, properly managed, can be transformed into human wisdom. For most people, that would count as a successful week. For us, it was simply Tuesday, with better compensation than usual. As I prepared to close the office for the evening, I reflected on iron masks and paper forgeries, on fathers
Order
and
in the
sons,
court.
on
I
valets
will
who
not tolerate
understood
this
that
behavior.
sometimes the
The
greatest
defendant is
service
remanded into
requires
custody.
the appearance of betrayal. The case was closed, the fee was paid, and justice had been served in the peculiar way that justice operates in Nero Wolfe's universe, where logic defeats chaos, and the most profound changes occur not through dramatic confrontation, but through the patient application of intelligence to human problems. One more thing, I said as Wolfe marked his place in his book. Do you think they'll be happy, the Vane household, I mean, now that the masks are off? He looked at me with the expression of a man who had seen too many human dramas to believe in permanent solutions. Happiness is not the objective, Archie. Functionality is the objective. They will be more honest with each other, which will make them more effective as a household and more bearable as human beings. Whether that produces happiness depends on factors beyond our control or concern. Spoken like a true philosopher. Spoken like a man who understands the difference between solving problems and creating paradise. He reopened his book. We are detectives, not gods. Our job is to restore order, not to guarantee contentment. I turned off my desk lamp and headed for the stairs, leaving Wolfe in his circle of reading light. Surrounded by the familiar objects that defined his world, the brownstone settled into its
Welcome
evening
to the
quiet.
house.
Not
I
empty
trust you found the
silence, but the
location
fullness
agreeable.
of things
Perfectly,
properly
thank you, D'Amico.
concluded.
A marvelous
Tomorrow would bring
turnout.
new problems, new clients, new opportunities for Nero Wolfe to demonstrate that the human mind, properly applied, can untangle any knot that
It
human
wasn't the
folly
money, Wolf.
creates.
It was the
But
land
tonight,
itself.
we had earned
Look
our
here,
rest.
where the property lines
The
meet the
case
new
of the
highway
Valet of
proposal.
the Iron Mask was closed, filed away with all the other human comedies and tragedies that had passed through our office. And somewhere uptown, a household was learning to live without masks, discovering that faces, however flawed, were preferable to the beautiful lies that had hidden them. The brownstone was secure, the account was replenished, and order had been restored to a small corner of a chaotic world. In Nero Wolfe's universe, that counted as victory enough. 2 days after the gathering in Wolfe's office, I was filing the last of the paperwork when the phone rang with news that added an unexpected coda to our Iron Mask symphony. D'Amico's voice came through calm but carrying an undertone I couldn't quite identify. Something between satisfaction and relief. Arthur Vane had made a decision that morning. The penthouse would be sold within the month, and he was purchasing a smaller residence with proper staff quarters and employment contracts. No more feudal arrangements, no more dependent servitude. Marta would run her kitchen with a real salary and vacation time. Pierce would serve as literary consultant with actual authority over script development. Even Lila had been offered a position as resident playwright, with her own workspace and creative independence. "And you?" I asked. "Head of household operations," D'Amico replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. With a pension plan and health insurance, Mr. Vane said he was tired of owning people and preferred employing them instead. After I relayed this to Wolfe, he grunted with satisfaction and returned to his book, but I caught him glancing at the safe where our generous fee rested. The case had achieved what D'Amico intended from the beginning, though few people would recognize the valet's surgical precision in orchestrating his employer's transformation.
They think they know
That
the
afternoon
rules.
brought Inspector Kramer
But in
to
this
our
city,
door,
the
his
only
face
rule is
wearing the
survival.
expression of a man who had heard
And I
rumors
intend to
he didn't
survive.
like. He planted himself in the red leather chair and demanded to know why a Broadway producer's household crisis had generated whispers about theft, blackmail, and midnight break-ins without producing a single police report. Wolfe handled him with the diplomatic skill of a man defusing a bomb. Yes, Arthur Vane had engaged us for security consultation. Yes, there had been family tensions involving property disputes. But since the property was recovered, the family reconciled and the client satisfied. No crime had occurred that required official intervention. It was, Wolfe suggested with
They
maddening
used the
calm,
mask as a
a
distraction.
triumph of
It was
mediation over
papier-mâché,
prosecution.
worthless. The
Kramer
real target
wasn't
was the
buying it
emeralds,
completely,
and now they're gone.
but he couldn't find a legal foothold for his suspicions. After 20 minutes of verbal sparring, he left with dark promises about what would happen if he ever discovered we had suppressed evidence of an actual felony. The front door closed behind him like the final note of a discordant song. Wednesday morning's mail brought the real conclusion to our case. Eric Vane had written from Vermont, his letter accompanying a check for $10,000 made out to cash. His handwriting was steadier than his voice had been in our office, and his words carried the weight of someone who had spent sleepless nights examining his own motivations. He wrote that he had been thinking about iron masks and self-made prisons, about the difference between justice and revenge. The money represented winnings from poker games where he had used his father's own methods, reading people's weaknesses and exploiting them for profit. He was returning it with instructions that we donate it anonymously to organizations helping people escape abusive relationships. He had accepted a teaching position in Maine, finding irony in the fact that he would be instructing students about ethical advertising practices. The letter's final paragraph struck me as particularly honest. Eric wrote that removing his mask had been terrifying because he hadn't known what face lay underneath. But he was learning that faces, however flawed, were preferable to the beautiful lies that had hidden them. Wolfe listened to the letter with his eyes closed, processing the implications through his usual filters. When I finished reading, he instructed me to research 3 reputable organizations and divide the donation equally among them. Eric Vane's education, he noted, should benefit others seeking similar liberation from their own constructed cages. That evening, as Fritz prepared dinner and the brownstone settled into its familiar rhythms, I reflected on the case's peculiar justice. Arthur Vane had learned that control was an illusion that ultimately controlled the controller. Eric had discovered that revenge was expensive for everyone involved, including the Avenger. D'Amico had demonstrated that sometimes the greatest service requires the appearance of betrayal. And we had learned once again that the most complex mysteries aren't crimes, but the human hearts that contemplate them. The phone rang during coffee. D'Amico again, this time reporting that Arthur Vane had begun eating breakfast in the kitchen with Marta, a breach of protocol that initially terrified the cook, but now seemed to please her. Pierce was working on a new play with Vane's encouragement rather than his contempt, and the Iron Mask's pedestal now held a small potted orchid. Vane's acknowledgement that living things required more attention than dead symbols,
Hold the line,
but
one moment,
provided
please.
greater
I need that
rewards.
connection now.
I filed the letter in our case folder and closed the drawer. The Iron Mask affair was complete, its participants scattered to new arrangements but bound together by shared understanding of how close they had come to mutual destruction. It wasn't the tidy conclusion of detective fiction, where villains receive punishment and heroes earn rewards. It was the messier resolution of actual
Everything's
human
accounted
drama,
Good.
where everyone learns something
disappear.
painful and emerges neither entirely innocent nor entirely guilty. Wolfe finished his beer and picked up his book, the fire crackling comfortably behind him. The brownstone wrapped around us like a well-tailored coat, solid and protective. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new clients, new opportunities for Nero Wolfe to demonstrate that human folly, properly managed, could be transformed into human wisdom. But tonight, we had earned our rest. The case was closed, the fee was paid, and order had been restored to a small corner
It's
of a
not metal
chaotic
at all,
world.
Chief.
The masks
It's a fake.
were gone, their wearers learning to live with their actual faces. And in the office on West 35th Street, everything was exactly as it should be, which in Nero Wolfe's universe counted as victory complete and justice served. The brownstone was secure, the account replenished, and another human comedy had reached its proper conclusion through the patient application of intelligence to folly. Just another case in our files, but one that reminded us why we do this work and why some battles are worth fighting even when victory looks suspiciously like everyone learning to be more honest with themselves and each other.